probably heard a lot about refined grains, whole grains, all of that stuff. So I want to share with you what a whole grain is. A whole grain, you've probably heard a lot about it. Eat more whole grains, more whole grains. The whole grain is basically means that it's an entire grain. So if a grain of a wheat or a grain of a brown rice, for example, okay? So this is what a grain looks like. So there are three parts to any grain. There's the bran layer, which is on the top, which I'll show you the next here, simplified version. So the top layer, the brown layer, is the bran. And the bran is the one that has a lot of fiber. It has a lot of B vitamins. It has other minerals like magnesium, zinc, phytochemicals. It also has some protein, some iron. Okay. And then the second layer, which is the endosperm, that's a little white section here, like you can see. That's the main part of the grain inside the bran. And that has very few vitamins, maybe some vitamins and minerals. It's mostly starch. It's all carbohydrates, pretty much. And then there's this little section here called germ. And you see it's yellow. And the yellow means that it has a lot of fat, but it has good types of fat. It has the unsaturated fats. And why that's important is because fats, there's some vitamins that can only be stored in fat, like vitamin E. So if there's fat in a grain or even your egg, like the egg yolk, that's where a lot of the healthy fat-soluble vitamins are. So that's what it has. So it's mostly fat. It has a lot of omega-3s. It has vitamin E. It has some minerals and some phytochemicals. So this is what an entire grain is. Now the problem started when our food was getting industrialized back in early 30s, maybe early 50s, or when our food was starting to get industrialized. I want you to kind of go back in the past and think. So when they started putting breads out and put them in the shelf to be sold, they started getting bad. You know, the brown rice or these other things that they started selling, they started to go bad really fast. And the manufacturers wanted to figure out why it's going, I mean, it's not good for business. So why is it getting bad? What can we do to fix this? So the first thing they decided to do is, okay, this layer on top, it has fiber. Now, fiber's function is it absorbs water in the atmosphere. So obviously when there's some water being absorbed, food start getting moldy and start getting bad, right? So the bread started getting moldy faster. So they said, okay, let's remove the bran and see what happens, and maybe we'll have a longer shelf life. So they tried that and it still started going bad. Now the thing was the germ, this little section here, it's fat. What happens when you leave a box of nuts closed, like a mixed nuts, and we keep it closed, and after a few months we open it and you have this very rancid smell, that fat smell when fat goes bad, that little smell. So that's what was happening because the fat was going bad. And so they decided, okay, let's remove the germ part and let's see what happens with the bread. And obviously it stayed well because this endosperm, that's pretty much what was left. And all it had was starches. It didn't have much vitamins, which weren't going bad because of the sun or the air. And it didn't have the fiber or anything. So it was staying. It had a longer shelf life than before. So that's what they decided to do. They removed all the fun stuff, which had all the important nutrients, and we were left with the white part. And that's what the white bread is. So I really like this quote here. It says that everybody used to prepare the grains properly before food industrialization happened. So your great-great-grandmother might remember that the instructions on the oatmeal box recommended an overnight soak before cooking. Those instructions were removed when quick oats and microwavable oats were invented. So the way our food was industrialized, we had to get rid of a lot of good old-fashioned things to make things fast, quick, the whole obesogenic environment we're talking about. So now we're left with pretty much nothing. We've removed the bran and we've removed the germ. We've left with a little carbohydrate there and has very little nutrition value. So today's grains that we have, all-purpose flour, wheat flour, white rice, barley, cornmeal, all of these have these parts removed, and we're left with the refined grain. And that's what a refined grain means. It means that all the important stuff is removed. Now we're only left with the little white endosperm part. So I'm gonna ask you a question. So the question is whole grains is the same as, and options are entire grain, multigrain, enriched grain, fortified grain, or whole wheat. And you can answer as many, you have multiple choices that you can pick from. So most of you agree that whole grain is an entire grain. I left these other options just to see what you know about multigrains and enriched grains. And whole wheat, yes, is also a whole grain. So you've probably heard about things like multigrain, refined grain, fortified grain, enriched grain. What are all these things, right? So the thing is that when enriched grain or fortified grain basically means that it is already refined. It has all these parts removed, but the manufacturers try to add some vitamins back to give vitamins because we don't have enough folate in our diets, enough all these vitamins that we've removed. So they add these B vitamins and other vitamins back to the food to give it some nutrition value. And that's why if you see breads, you'll see enriched wheat flour or fortified wheat flour. These are basically, it's just a different name, but it's not a whole grain. It's just a name that they're trying to make it similar to whole grain in a way. Nothing can match nature, Mother Nature. So they are trying to put things back, but it's not the same. Okay. And then multi-grains means that just by the name, it means many grains. So it could be that all of them are whole grains, but it could also be that, one of them is, let's say they use quinoa and then they used all-purpose flour. So all-purpose flour is one grain, quinoa is another grain. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's always 100% whole grain. It could be, but it could not be. It just means that there are multiple grains that make the bread. That's what it means. Now, how can you identify whole grains? How do you know that there's actual whole grains in whatever I eat? One of the things you look for is look for the stamp here. It is a third-party company by the Whole Grain Council that they actually certify that this is actually whole grain, 100% whole grain. So you are looking for that little stamp on your breads that proves that it is whole grain. Another way to find out that if your food is actually whole grain is looking for the word whole or whole grain on the first ingredient of your ingredient list, because the ingredients are based on the weight. So the highest amount of weight on your food will be in the top of the list and then it goes down. So if the first ingredient is whole grain, whole wheat, or whole rye or whole oats, those are for sure means that they have whole grain. Also, you want to look for whole barley. I know it's a little confusing why, but I'll tell you why. So there are certain foods that are naturally whole grain, and we haven't really been able to refine them like some foods, but some obviously we have. So I'll just give you the names of natural whole grains, except for this gray little part, I'll leave it for later. So brown rice, obviously we know how to refine it. We've made white rice. Whole wheat, we know that. Whole oats, most of the oats are already whole grain. It's not easy to remove the bran and stuff with oats. So generally oats are naturally whole grain. Barley isn't. Barley can be refined. And then the other names here are millet, sorghum, teff, quinoa, corn. These are all whole grains. We have other grains called amarnath, buckwheat, tapioca, chia, rye, cassava. All of these are whole grains. Okay, whole wheat has evolved over years. So the first whole wheat that we know of, that was the first whole wheat that was cultivated or used, was called einkorn, and that was found near Turkey. That's where it started, and we still have that grain. We still can find the flour of it a lot, and it is naturally completely whole grain, and it has a lot less gluten and a lot more protein than the whole wheat that we actually eat today. So if you want to have a healthier version of wheat, you can go for these ones. Emmer, this is usually found in Europe. Emmer, or the other name is farro. Spelt, durum wheat, that's the wheat that makes the Indian breads. It's still part of wheat, and most of it is not a little whole grain. And then there's Khorasan wheat, which is mostly found in the Southeast, Middle East regions. And then the whole wheat that we know of, Frike, that's also found mostly in the Middle East. Bulgur, Whole bulgur is whole wheat. Now, if you see here, some names you've probably heard a lot about: couscous, bulgur, pearl barley, and you might think this is whole grain, but they're not. These are actually refined. So if you did want to get bulgur, you would want to find the whole grain bulgur when you go grocery shopping. Same thing with barley. There are many varieties of barley, but the barley that is mostly sold here is pearl barley, and it is refined. So if you do want to get a whole grain barley, look for the whole grain barley or any other types of barley other than the pearl. Okay. Now, I've been talking about whole grain all this entire time. Why does it matter? Why am I even spending all this time talking about whole grain? Whole grains are associated with a lot of reduction in risk of diseases. So I want you to open your workbook and add these answers down, because I did not put these answers left blank. But eating whole grain regularly can reduce your risk of stroke by 30 to 36%, can reduce the risk of diabetes by 21 to 30%, reduce the risk of heart disease by 25 to 28%, reduce inflammatory diseases because whole grains, like the germ, has omega-3 in it. So that is anti-inflammatory. It has vitamins and all the other benefits, and it has fiber. So all of these improve inflammation and immunity. It also reduces gum disease. Remember last week, Dr. Saima was talking about gum disease being one of the risk factors of obesity. So, and whole grain can help with that. It can help with reducing colorectal cancers. It helps in weight maintenance and healthy carotid arteries. And research actually shows that eating just 1 ounce serving of whole grain every single day will reduce your risk of death by all-cause mortality by 5% and reduce your risk of death from heart disease by 9%. Just by eating a whole grain a day. That's it.